Hi, just testing. Can you hear me? Just testing again.
Loud and clear.
Yes, sir. All clear. Hi, good afternoon and good morning and good evening to all our DRC 6 participants and our expert panelist and our moderator and my ADPC colleague. I welcome you to our first discussion forum on the impact of fake news and misinformation, exploring the key challenges and lessons learned. This event is organized under ADPC's regional training course on 6th disaster risk communication in the new normal from 4 to 22nd July 2022. Before I invite our moderator to take this floor, I would like to request all our DRC6 participants to be with us for next 75 minutes because this session will going to be very, very interesting. So thank you very much in advance for your participation. So now I invite Bill Ho, our moderator, to take the floor. So Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunil, and a very warm welcome to everybody to this online discussion to look at the important issue of what we call the fake news. I think in the past 2 years, I think a lot of us, I mean, at least I have, developed really not so good habit in terms of checking the number of new COVID-19 infection. That's the first thing I do on a daily basis. And right after that, I started going through maybe the detailed updates in terms of, what's the latest situation on the pandemic. But I was frustrated by the different kind of news and information that is presented to me by different channels. And that is somebody saying that the situation is getting worse. Some say the situation is actually getting much better. So I think this kind of confusion, misleading information is not only limited to when we're talking about COVID-19. This is also very common to any other sort of major events and emergency situations. You are just basically flooded by this enormous amount of different information from everywhere. I think, unfortunately, I think this is the world that we're living in right now in terms of a readily and oversupplied information that just kind of wait us to figure out what is the fact, what is not. So for us in the sort of international development, for us in the disaster risk reduction field, it is actually has a lot of impact on our work. Because for us, when it comes to the bottom line, what we're trying to do is actually trying to create this behavior change in the local communities, in the governments, in the policymaker, so that they can become more risk informed or risk aware. But this really builds upon that we can actually establish a very good trust between us and also between the audience or the readers of our information, of the material that we put out. So when it comes to fake news, when it comes to misinformation, it becomes a really important and critical issue for us. And also it's very important that we need to have a better understanding of the impact of the fake news. And from there, then we can come up with solutions, with approach, with ways that we can actually how to manage the way that we put out our information in a very effective and also very trustworthy way. So it is actually my great pleasure to have two very distinguished speakers with us today. Mr. Natapanu Nopakun, the Deputy Director General of the Department of Information, part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Royal Thai Government, and Ms. Sunomat Misayati from the Thai Public Broadcasting Service, or the Thai PBS, joining us today to talk about their experience on this very important subject. So the way of the format of this online discussion forum is that each speaker will have roughly 25 minutes to share their experiences. And then at the end of their presentations, we have roughly 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A sessions for us to ask any questions to them. If you have any questions during their presentations, please feel free to utilize the chat box on the Zoom. Just type your questions in there, and my colleagues will collect those questions and then present it to the speakers after their presentation. So without ado, I'd like to first introduce and welcome Mr. Nopakun. He's a Thai diplomat with 27 years of experience in bilateral, multilateral, and management experience. Based on his past experience, he has handled projects related to all regions of the world and on many substantial issues such as rural development, human trafficking, human rights, disarmament, refugees, migrations, corruption, global health, and regional security, among others. Mr. Nopakun, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kun Bill, and thank you to ADPC for the invitation. And hello to all the participants. I see that you are, of course, based from many countries outside Thailand. And of course, hello, of course, to Simona from Thai PBS. We've met and been working with each other in the past. So I'd like to ask if it's possible, if someone keeps on moving a bit sometimes, so I can know that my signal, if I say something that makes sense, please nod a bit, so I can still I can know that you still have my connection. I mean my internet connection, just from time to time. But thank you very much. Well, I have 25 minutes, and I welcome all of you listening here. Well, first of all, my relationship with DRR and disaster relief, reduction, disaster risk communication, crisis communication. Of course, one main issue is that I was involved in communicating about the COVID situation in Thailand in the past 2 years. So it was the first time that we had an English language summary briefing on live television for English language speakers in Thailand about the COVID situation on a daily basis. And it was good because we were able to bring up this feeling of that foreign nationals and English speakers were part of Thai society, and sort of like we would be on the same boat. And as Bill said, we would be following up the numbers of those infected, newly infected, those who recovered, those who are on respirators, or those who have passed away. So we were following these numbers on a daily basis. And it was the English language communication part that I was involved in, which brought about many lessons learned regarding disaster risk communication. And of course, about the issue of fake news and misinformation as well, which is the topic of discussion for today, right? Impact of fake news and misinformation. Of course, there's also disinformation as well, exploring key challenges and lessons learned. Of course, in this day and age, it's so difficult with all of this fake news and disinformation and misinformation. And there's a lot that I've learned from handling the COVID communication part. So I'd like to first start off by maybe talking a little bit about my perception of fake news and hoax news. Of course, it's something that's been in the world for a long time, and of course people might have called it propaganda or might have called it information that is half true and half not true, just to bring in the interest of the public, or to sabotage some entity, or in this day and age, of course, to build more income and profit for websites, or cause some disarray in society with some hidden agenda. So that's what's happening, of course, around the world. And usually fake news, in my experience, would be kind of succinct and short, around eight sentences, or not over 3 paragraphs. It's able to be captured very quickly. You cannot find the source of reference of information for where the fake news is coming from, and the period of dissemination would be around 7 days. Branding issues. It's also related to diplomacy, which is my field of work. And of course, when countries have conflicts around the world, of course, there's always fake news flying around. So I wouldn't go into detail of the international politics side of that. But for my experience, there are many types of fake news that Thailand has been dealing with. One cluster is fake news that has a political agenda. Another one is about consumer goods, meaning there's always these fake news going around that if you use lime and lemon as part of your shampoo, it's gonna make your hair grow better, things like that. And of course, in terms of medicine as well, like things which would be medicinal, have medicinal use, but then they actually are not. And of course, as I mentioned, pandemic, we've had a lot of fake news and information about the pandemic, which was actually not true and caused kind of havoc. But aside from pandemics, also natural disasters, because ADPC, right? ADPC is about disaster preparedness. So around 10 years ago, we had major floods in Thailand, and there were fake news flying around in that time as well. For example, exaggerations of the situation, meaning like there were news going around on social media that there's black tap water turned black around the city, and then we're all gonna die. Things like that, or fake news in the pandemic stage. There's a lot of examples for that. But the one guiding question which I received was the major impacts of all of this. Of course, I think the first is that it builds a very different perception of reality. Second, it makes people act very differently, which they may not act so if they had not been in touch with that kind of fake news. And thirdly, of course, causing panic and danger. This is very, very important in all of the cases that I mentioned. Now, the fake news in Thailand, I'd like to give an example that sometimes there are news which are classified as satire or parody. And then there's news that are classified as false connections, having false connections with another issue, which in reality, they're not connected. Another one is, of course, headlines which have a misleading content. I wouldn't want to say that the press, well, I work very closely with the press, and Simona would know. I'm also the deputy spokesperson I'm also the deputy spokesperson of the foreign ministry. So I work closely with the press, and they are our friends, and of course. But sometimes we see headlines that are misleading. The headline says one thing, but the content inside says another. And of course, false content is another thing. Another one is imposter content, imposters, or manipulated content, or fabricated content. So there are fake news and misinformation we have had to deal with. Of course, I'm speaking on behalf of as government, but of course, as foreign ministry, I also represent civil society when I'm abroad. So the whole spectrum of Thai society goes through my agency when we are abroad. So therefore, our outlook and our perception would have to be kind of wide. I mean, we understand how to deal with news, but of course there are so many players that we have to be very careful, and we work very well with press and other government and international agencies. But fake news, sometimes I've met some young people, and they say that some news that they've seen sound more credible than the things that the foreign ministry is releasing, which made me kind of sad. Like they're saying this this piece of information sounds more credible than actually what the spokesperson or deputy spokesperson had been saying. So I was kind of sad on that. But sometimes fake news, it comes out in a way that looks very, very credible, especially when they are posted on social media, certain Facebook accounts or Line. Here in Thailand, we use the Line application, and also Twitter and Instagram as well. So sometimes they look kind of real, they look kind of authentic just because they are on those platforms. It would be noted that in the United States, for example, around 4 months before the last presidential election, there was fake news that was going on around social media in the United States, and it was something like that the Pope, His Holiness the Pope, supported Donald Trump as president. And there was also fake news regarding was kind of like selling weapons to the IS. So there was this kind of news going around that actually supported the popularity of then President Trump before the re-election. You see, so it's related to politics as well, and many issues. Now, another guiding question was which social groups are more prone to the impacts of fake news and misinformation. From my experience, I would say that in Thailand, in particular, fake news would affect everybody, of course. As I mentioned about fake news about consumer goods, pandemic, or the floods, it would affect everybody in general. But the most vulnerable group in Thailand, and one group is the migrant community, the foreign labor migrant community. And I'll give you an example. Another group is I would say the working class service industry, the tourism industry, and I'll give you the rationale why. So the first is a migrant community. When I was communicating about COVID for the past 2 years, and right now, fortunately, it's only twice a month. So when I was doing that, I would find that actually even some agencies, government agencies and NGOs were victim to fake news, and they were actually thinking that it was real and acting upon it. So for example, there were some news that came out in the outset during the COVID pandemic that affected Thailand, was that foreign nationals, particularly Westerners, were the source of COVID. And then, of course, there's another one that Chinese tourists were the main source of COVID in Thailand. So there was some group of people, I don't know if either by doing a parody or just making fun, going out to hunt, making a clip about going out to hunt Westerners, in a kind of a jokingly way, but it's not funny, right? So it's like, well, we have to probably like hunt and catch some foreign tourists here because they are the source of COVID in Thailand. I mean, we were fine the way we are, and then before tourists or foreigners came in, that was their thinking, and also Chinese tourists as well, because the information that was received was that it began in Wuhan town in city in China, and of course the number one tourist group coming to Thailand was China, and it has been so ever since. So that kind of sort of like misperception sort of like shed a negative light on foreign nationals in Thailand, and even more about the migrant community. That in the sense that, well, for whether it's, I don't know how true or how false it is, but the perception was that the neighboring countries of Thailand were not able to manage the COVID situation as well as Thailand at the beginning. So speaking about our neighboring countries like Myanmar, the perception was that the government of Myanmar did not was not able to handle it well. We were not sure of the numbers. The numbers in Thailand were quite clear because, of course, Dr. Tawisin from the Health Ministry and myself for the English language version, we reported on the numbers on a daily basis. We tried to be very transparent, but that was not the case for our neighbor Myanmar in the perception of Thai people. So that fell upon the migrant community in Thailand. Around the majority of migrant labor in Thailand are from Myanmar and of course from other neighboring countries, but it numbers around 3 to 4 million. Well, officially maybe 3, but unofficially, of course, maybe 4 or more. So that fell upon the Myanmar migrant community. And there were also news spreading around that some Myanmar people were opting to stay in Thailand or traveling into Thailand just to get, hospital care or just to get vaccinated, get tested, because at that time vaccines were still scarce. It was not as available as it was now, and then other kinds of news as well, and that played a toll. That took a toll because one concrete example is that even a Thai government agency came out with an infographic, a media product, an infographic, sort of like celebrating a bit that on this particular day around 2 years ago. So the infographic came out saying that let's be confident, let's fight on, because today we discovered that there were 0 Thai people infected with COVID. So the infographic came out that yay, zero Thais were infected with COVID. Okay, a reason to produce an infographic. But at the bottom of the infographic, it said, but we have 35 Myanmar migrants affected with COVID. So that sort of like reflected a bit of the way of thinking, which was probably due to a lot of information going on, and of course about being not inclusive enough. I think that infographic, I really had to veto, and of course talk to the agencies that produced that infographic, that yes, we can rejoice that no Thai nationals are infected today for this day, but then you cannot write on the bottom of the infographic saying, but we have some foreign migrants infected, as if they're not part of society, right? So it has to be inclusive. So examples like that. In terms of the service and tourism industry, I think they were very much affected, because when there are fake news, things going around about how severe or how not severe that the situation is in terms of COVID, it affected the tourism industry. Part of our income, of course, for the country. You would know that. I'm sure all of you here in this panel have visited Thailand, but if not, of course, you'll be coming very soon. But during normal times, you have had 40 million, around 39 million tourists coming in annually. So it's a big industry for Thailand, of course, and they are affected by any fake news. Fake news such as the quarantine system in this particular city, in this particular sandbox, like Phuket. Maybe fake news. There have been fake news that the system there doesn't really work, and you can actually go out of the quarantine and things like that. The things that affect our strict system. Okay, but nevertheless, we have maintained that strict system. So in the early years of the pandemic, so 2020 and 2021, we have held the numbers very low, held down the numbers very low, and when it came 2022. Of course, the numbers to increase. Part of the communication process. Information
Sorry, Natapanu, I think your connection is kind of bad at this moment.
Be, of course, in my thought as well.
Hello, can you hear me? Oops. I think,
Hello.
oh.
Hear me?
Yes, I think we lost in maybe the last 45 seconds.
Okay, great. Just 45 seconds. Okay, so there are many opportunities, I think, to intercept fake news from the source to the sender, from the messaging to the platform and channel that is used. So there are a lot of in Thailand we would call it flushing out the dirty water with the clean water. Using the good water to flush out. Because sometimes if you go head on with fake news, sometimes it doesn't work or they disappear already. So we try to bring in original content, or issue is from the starting from the source and how we send it, and from the platform as well. It might be a way that we use is to use hashtag which support information sharing, knowledge building, and ways and means to detect fake news, whether it's fake or not. Of course, because sometimes when fake news comes from abroad,
Oops, I think we lost him again. Hi, Natapano, can you hear us?
yes.
Maybe you can turn off your video. Maybe that can conserve some of the bandwidth so that we can hear a bit more clear. Okay.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
It's better.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. At least you have my
we
picture
lost
there.
maybe the 30 seconds again. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, you're back
Okay.
on now. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so sometimes we use hashtags to actually directly respond, and we support information sharing and ways and means to detect fake news. Now, if I move on to the digital and social media, of course, plays a very important role. Usually in Thailand, what we found was that fake news on digital media is very, very viral. It's very fast. It comes out very fast, and it is actually, I would have to use the word, it's kind of sexy as well. It attracts a lot of attention in a short span. It's easy to understand, and then it sort of like comes and goes very quickly, so that people don't actually want to double check it. And that we try to have people learn how to detect it is that if each media product has a sort of like a hidden agenda, sometimes we can detect what that hidden agenda is. Or it might be too exaggerated, like getting rich on from a digital internet job and things like that, or something which is too dramatic, as I mentioned, like the fake news about black water coming out of the taps are all around Bangkok. Of course, that was not happening. So those are the things which we have been facing, and I think that digital and social media can actually have their kind of support to prevent fake news as well. Now, we've been talking to a lot of social media companies and social media giants on how to do this, and we've been partnering with them as well. There are a lot of news agencies aside from social media companies that have set up task forces to detect and disseminate the accurate information to fight off fake news. Like, of course, there is this civil society group NGO in Thailand called the CoFact, which CoFact actually brings in a lot of fake news and then brings out the accurate information and then disseminates that. So we've been working with them as well. In terms of government, we also have a national anti-fake news center, which is hosted by the Digital Economy Ministry. So this anti-fake news center actually has a protocol. When fake news is detected, the government agency responsible would have to respond within 24 hours on that particular fake news. They will help disseminate it. So aside from that structure within the Thai government, each ministry also has their own anti-fake news center. In last course, to educate the ways to detect and fight off fake news in Thailand, because it affects everybody, of course, in terms of action and panic and everything. So we've advised the general public from time to time to follow news from credible sources, credible television stations and internet pages and websites. I mentioned Thai PBS is also one, which is very credible. I'm not talking about government or private television stations, but also there are actually other channels and other news outlets which we work with very well. So firstly is to follow news from credible sources, and of course double check with the sources which might be credible internationally as well. And of course, there's also this other way in which we try to solve in terms of government, meaning that we try to sort of like practice a law enforcement in terms of the sites or the stations or the news agencies that have actually violated the Computer Crimes Act in Thailand. So we have this Computer Crimes Act in Thailand. So meaning using legal enforcement. But all in all, I think that it's very important for the general public to learn how to detect it. In Thailand, I think we're one of the highest users of Facebook in Asia and in the world. And we have 5G and everyone's very connected. So it's very important to sort of like go down into the detail on how we can continue to prevent the dissemination of fake news in Thailand. So I'd like to stop here first, and perhaps my time is up, I guess. So I return the floor back to Bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kunatapon. I think we actually have a few questions for you in the chat box. I think from Shamser is mentioning about in terms of the different types of fake news and information, and if you have facing kind of challenges of fake news during like a disaster response situation. I think you mentioned a bit earlier in your talk about the flood in Thailand in 2011. So maybe if you can maybe elaborate a bit more on that, if you can.
Yes, thank you. I'll just answer in general. We have this scheme called Sure Before Share. So meaning that sure gone share, meaning that be sure what you're going to share on social media before you share it. So something like if you have some information on the Line or WhatsApp application, you have to be very, very sure before you share it. And I'm very happy that some of the applications, like the one that we use in Thailand, which is called Line, some of those applications also have a sort of like a double verification process now before sharing something. So that's one scheme that we wanted to we went through. Sure gone share, sure before sharing. There was one question about influencers. That's a very good question. Yes, Bill is nodding, so I'm still being heard. Yes, so influencers, yes, very, very good question. We have actually used a lot of influencers because influencers in Thailand are very, very very popular, and the messaging that they support is very, very viral as well. So for COVID, I would like to say first that we had this doctor named Dr. TSA. Of course, the CCSA is the Center for COVID Situation Administration. The central agency, the interagency, became an influencer in himself. The COVID situation, the numbers, the and things like that. So he became an influencer in this issue, and many people were sort of like talking about him. But of course, when you become popular, when you become an influencer, sometimes there's two sides of the coin, right? So of course there were people with a political agenda, trying to say things as well. So I guess we have been utilizing influencers from time to time in any situation or disaster. I think in Thailand we have to use more influencers for disasters. We've been using it a lot for other issues like big general issues like climate change or environment, but for actual disasters, be it in urban areas or like floods or other types of disasters in the future, I think we'll have to use it more. But it's in the DNA of Thai media consumers already. So it's a very good question. So I see in the chat shore before share. That's it's kind of a very short phrase, but it captured it. If you ask any Thai person, they would know the phrase "shoreก่อนแชร์," shore before share. So I hope that has been working. But of course, there's still a lot to do. And of course, there's one other question about, can government prevent 100% fake news from implementing any? Okay, I don't think so. Of course, it's a very good question from Sunil. I think we cannot prevent 100% government alone, because government is even accused. Government is even accused of creating fake news, or as I mentioned in history, we call it propaganda. Even today, every government is accused of creating fake news. But I wouldn't want to judge and go into that. But we cannot do it alone for sure. As I mentioned, media, credible media plays a very important role in preventing fake news. Some media might want to have ratings, want to have a lot of high ratings on their social media pages. So sometimes the news is not that accurate. But other media, as I mentioned, have been helping a lot. And of course, civil society, like that NGO I mentioned, Co-Fact, it's a fact-checking organization in Thailand. They help a lot as well. So it's all part of it's a whole of society approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nopakun. I think this is definitely a really well shared experience from the government sector. And of course, you mentioned the importance of media. So now I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Simone, who's actually an assistant project manager at the Disaster Communication Development Center of the Thai PBS, working on creating a platform for stakeholders, citizens, journalists, and scholars to share knowledgeable and useful information about disaster mitigation and adaptation. She's also a co-host of the 2 Degrees show on the Thai PBS. It's an environmental show aiming to tell the stories about different projects, initiatives, and people who are working on inspirational ideas to promote sustainability and fight the effect of the climate change. Simone, I think the floor is yours. I think we will have our colleague sharing the slides for you. Over to you.
I found a way to share the slides. So thank you so much, Bill, and thank you, Kunatapano. As mentioned, we've worked together before. So first of all, let me thank you, ADPC, for having me today. We also work, Thai PBS have worked with ADPC before on various projects, and I'm very happy to be here to share my experience. First of all, let me just introduce myself. My name is Simona Misayati. As Kun Bill has mentioned, I'm a co-host and content creator, but also assistant project manager for the Disaster Communication Development Center at Thai PBS. So the show I work on is called 2 Degrees. It's an environmental TV show aimed to educate the youth about climate solutions and sustainable living. So I'll be sharing that more later. So my experience as assistant project manager for the Disaster Communication Center, we are a center that's founded by in 2011 at Thai PBS. As Khun Bill has mentioned, we are a public broadcasting service. So in the year 2011, there was this big flood here in Thailand, and I think Khun Natapanu also talked about it a bit earlier, that during that time, people were desperate for news and they were looking for immediate and current news, but there were some challenges and the news weren't relayed to the general public in time. So in Thai PBS, we believe in working together to relay news to the public, which are correct and not fake news. So this is why DXC in short was founded, because we want all news media to come together and work together and share correct news. And if we work together, I think that will be, that goal will be achieved easier. So at the Disaster Communication Center, we are actually separated into three different sectors. We have the network side, we have the program side, and we have the news side. So this will, I think, will help cooperate different medias, cover crucial information and to relay the information to the public in time. Because when it comes to news, we believe that we shouldn't be competing with each other to relay the facts, but we should be working together, because in the end, correct news is most important. So in 2018, we dedicate to develop content, and we continue to raise awareness about disaster-related issues, prepare for emergencies, and report and cover crucial news in time. But we don't only talk about disaster, we also talk about how to prepare for disasters. I'm gonna talk a bit about my show later. So, but first let me talk about the topic that the fake news that I have experience on. So of course it's climate change, because my show is focused on climate change solution and sustainable living. So I'm gonna share my key challenges, lessons learned, and also things I found out while reporting on communicating news relating to sustainability, climate change, and climate solution. So the first big challenge I've had, and many of my colleagues working on climate change news, is how to communicate that climate change is real. Like, even though scientists and researchers have agreed for many, many years that human activities have affected our planet, and though the Earth's climate is ever changing since the planet has formed, but human activities has really accelerated it, and releasing greenhouse gases, or a lot of our activities are affecting our Earth. But sadly, even though like scientists have been talking about it for ages, the science is there, but not everyone believes it, which is a bit weird, because when we talk about science, it's facts, right? But so why do we have to believe in science? Because science are facts. But sadly, like there's a research in 2014 says that even though 90% of climate scientists agree that global warming or human activities are affecting our climate, only the public thinks that only 55% of climate scientists agree on global warming. So there's a gap between what the general public thinks and what is actually happening. So, and the latest IPCC report says that it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. So there's reports, countless of reports firsthand from scientists saying that what the humans are doing is affecting our climate. But then there are still deniers, still a sizable population of climate detractors who cast doubt on climate change, even when faced with concrete scientific evidence. So let's say, like, it's not fake news, but climate change is not fake news, but it's bad news. And maybe people don't want to face it. It's easier for some to believe that climate scientists are falsifying their studies, like so they can make money promoting climate change industry. Or for some, maybe like the fake news stories are easier to accept than the real story, maybe because these climate change news are quite scary and quite hard to think about. So sometimes accepting the fake news are easier. I saw somebody ask about the different types of fake news. So in climate change, I guess there are around like 3 or 4 types. The first is like satire or parody. Like sometimes when you see like Trump supporters saying, oh, like the earth is the earth getting warmer, but why is Kentucky getting colder? So they're using this climate as comedy, or like when Trump says, oh, it's like, it's so cold here, let's have some climate change in this area, something like that. Like they turn it into a joke. Or the second one is misleading news that's sort of like true, but used in the wrong context. So like selectively shows in real facts that are, but then they chose to report it to gain headlines. Like, for example, 100 reasons why global warming is natural. Yeah, of course, some of the effects are natural, but the causes, human definitely have an impact on that. The third kind of fake news is like misleading news that are not based on facts, but like are ongoing narrative, like it's something they have an agenda to support it. So all this kind of like misleading news are making people think that climate change is actually not as bad as it seems, or not, that we don't have to act now. So there seems to be like a crucial communication gap that desperately needs to be bridged, like because it obscures us from truly recognizing how dire the climate change situation is. So in order to properly tackle the issue of climate change, we need to confront the issue of fake news on climate change as well, which is something I work on a daily basis, creating my show. And nowadays, most people obtain the news from mainstream media like TV, social media, YouTube, but not from scientific paper. So they trust in us, in journalists and content creator, to digest all this information from the scientific paper, and then they read it because it's easier to digest. But sometimes, like in an attempt to be impartial, some mainstream media like outlets sometimes downplay and undermine like all these scientific efforts because they want to sound impartial, or they have a different agenda. So they take this facts, but then put out give a different side of the story as well. But now, like some climate scientists are saying, like sometimes, as you can see nowadays, there are many like ongoing events, such as extreme weather events, such as like flood, droughts, heavy rain, and mainstream media sometimes often fail to mention that climate change are a part of this cause. So, and this Ed Hawkins, who's a famous climate scientist, actually said, expert says that climate change is already increasing the frequency of extreme weather events, and many single events have been shown to have made worse by global warming. He says, why don't say, the science have already moved on. It would be great to see that news coverage of extreme weather events rather than the current inaccurate stock phrases. So it's sometimes for me, when I see all this very extreme weather reports, I fail to see the connection between climate change. This is not fake news, but maybe misleading, or maybe there's a gap between this communication. And also nowadays, it's also hard to determine fake news and real news, because sadly, news are heavily influenced by powerful people as well. People who have a lot to gain from releasing these greenhouse gases, maybe the oil companies or the car companies. So they try to downplay the effect of climate change. So my main goal working at Thai public broadcasting service is how to stop this and how to relay information about climate change and climate solutions. Because in the end, even though climate change, even though it's not real, like what's the worst that could happen if we have more green jobs, if we have more livable cities that are renewable, if we have clean water, if there's no food crisis, what's the worst that could happen? We just have a better life, that's all, even though climate change is not real. So I'm gonna talk about how I tackle these problems and how I try to communicate, and how I try through my show to talk about climate solutions. So we have 3 main programs serving different target audiences. So one is Don't Panic, which is Russell Pye. The next is The Camp, And the third is my show, which is 2 degrees. As I said earlier, not a lot of people watch the news. People want something that are more digestible, and so we try to separate each segment of the news and then post onto the social media as well. So one of the things that I believe, and I'm happy that I'm working with Thai PBS, is because we are like BBC. We don't have any commercials. We don't have any companies buying commercials on our page. So we don't have any the need to work to get more views, to get more shares, because we have to sell commercials. So we are able to use all the time we have to relay the news to the general public. So the first show that I work on 2 degrees. So we try to educate. I believe that people don't want to look at big data or don't want to listen to all the scientific facts, but we try to educate through positive examples and community-driven projects, because we believe that big statistics and data kind of sometimes turns people off, especially with my target audience, which are the youth. People need something relatable and fun. So we try to break climate change solutions down into things that we can all relate to. So like food, fashion, lifestyle. An example of something in Thailand that used to be a big fake news or misinformation is about waste management in Thailand. So in this episode, I talk about waste management. Beforehand in Thailand, there's this big idea that why do we need to recycle our trash at home, because it's all going to be thrown into the same place, into the landfill anyway. So what's the point for us to separate our trash? That was one of the big challenges in Thailand, because people, the general public, still believe that I don't have to separate my trash. It's going to be thrown in the same place anyway. So in this show, we take a couple of youth, and when we go to the actual landfill waste management center to show them how the trash are separated. And by doing this, the youth actually themselves, before they go, they actually thought as well, like none of this system actually exists. And so we try to tackle fake news or to tackle misinformation by explaining in a fun way. So we let the kids go, and we have them separate the trash themselves as the workers do. And they realize how hard it is that the work that the people at the waste management center have to do. And they come back and reflect. And through the show, we show that the misinformation that they've understood before is actually not true, but then this side of the story is also interesting as well. The next show we have is Don't Panic, which is a docu-series that talk about different environmental topics like man-made and natural disaster. But we go into detail about, and we bring in experts to talk about, for example, the big pollution problem, the PM 2.5, which before COVID, 2 years ago, Thai people still find it hard to put on a mask. Like, even though I think Kunatapanu would be very familiar, like even though the news have been trying to like put on your mask or put in your mask, a lot of the general public still didn't believe or actually put on the mask. But when COVID happened, like it's also two birds in one stone, where they put on a mask because of COVID, but also to help prevent PM 2.5 problem. So on this show, we try to talk about more serious problems. For example, the pollution problem in Thailand, which has been a problem for many, many years. But then we also try to take example from different countries like China, where they had big pollution problem as well, but they were able to tackle it. Because in Thailand, there are still misinformation about how the source of the pollution. People, before 2 or 3 years ago, when we started doing the show, most of the general public understood that these pollution comes from forest fires caused by people, small villages who are living in the forest. But actually, we all know that the main problem, and as I said before, sometimes fake news are caused by people with power who wants to lead the public to not know the truth. For with the pollution problem, the main sources are coming from crops burning of growing corns, growing sugarcane. All of these kind of unicrops needs to burn their crops in order to keep up with the production, because if they don't burn their crops, they cannot produce in time, and then in the end they don't get the money. So we try to kind of present where the actual problem, where the root causes of the pollution are coming from, by bringing in people and taking them to see these crops burning and these corn burning, sugarcane burning. So they realize that actually it's not from people up in the village who are burning small patches of land, but actually from these big corporations who have huge pieces of land and are burning it in mass quantities. So in the show, not only do we take them to see the corn crops and the sugarcane crops, but I also went to the small villages and show through the show how people in the small villages are actually living, and they're actually the ones who are protecting the forest from the forest fires. They go out and stop the fires and prevent the fires. So I guess in my field, in my challenges, what we try to talk about is not to pinpoint, hey, this is fake news, but try to go to the root problem, the root causes, and show them in a way that it's interesting, and then hopefully in the end it will shift the perception of the public and so they can understand it and realize that there are more to the story. Because sadly, with social media and with Facebook and Twitter, there's this thing with the algorithm that's kind of like echo chamber. So when you see, so for example, if I'm a climate change denier and I read these articles that, oh, climate change isn't real, the algorithm in Facebook will keep popping up stories about climate change that are not real to support my own original belief. So it's hard for me to, for example, as a climate denier, to see, oh, actually climate change is real, because the news that are presented to them through the algorithm is echoing what they already believe in. So as someone who works in old media, which is TV, it's still easier for me to kind of present the news in a way that I want. But that's another challenge for me that I want to try to tackle, is how to have people who are already mindset believe that climate change is not real, or COVID-19 is a hoax, or all this. How this is something we still at the news channel also is a challenge. How do we find a solution to this and fight the social media fake news? So I think this is what I've prepared for today. I hope it made sense. And thank you again for ADPC for having me. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. So we do have one quick question, I think, from Hamdi saying, asking in terms of how you mentioned earlier in terms of, trying to report or sort of, transmit the scientific understanding to the general public. So he was asking, how do we making sure that, the scientific papers or information will be easier to digest, will be to absorb by the general public?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. So for us, like on the show, it's people don't watch the 25 minutes show anymore. Like when you change like when you watch TV, or I don't know if people still watch TV anymore, 25 minutes is a really long time for my show. So in what we are trying to do is that we break it down into smaller clips. And even though I think of myself as quite young, but I don't use TikTok, and I'm really not, I don't understand the TikTok trend, but we have a team at Thai PBS who are trying to do that and breaking this kind of a 25-minute show into shorter versions. And for example, take something that are like 5 ways to reduce waste at home into a short clip. And then if they're interested, they can look more into that. But in terms of that is still something we are trying to do and hopefully succeed soon. And I want I think I wanted to know what we can do as scientists to make your job easier to do this translation from science to news. Oh, okay. Yes, thank you. I think this makes it clear. A lot of times I've worked at Thai PBS, we work with a lot of scientists. We have around 25 scientists who are our consultants. And a lot of times when we, I think one thing we get is when we ask scientists to come and explain something to us with presentations and everything, it's the information is, there's a lot of information. For example, if there's 100 points, I think what the general public can take is maybe 3 points. So for me, if something to make it easier for us to relay the news, maybe break it down to some, choose 3 main points and then explain it more rather than having 100 different points and then not enough information on each. I think for what we do at our channels, we have smaller, we talk about less topic, but we explain it in details. Because I believe that if there's too many topics, too many discussion points, people get a bit lost and they don't know what to focus on. So on one episode of my show, I talk about, let's say, fast fashion. And I talk about how secondhand clothing can help reduce waste. So I talk about that, but then go on to different details. So a lot of the scientists I've worked with, they try to, I understand there's so many information to discuss, there's so many different exciting facts, but then I get kind of like overwhelmed, like, oh my God, there's too much information. So sometimes breaking it down is or choosing, highlighting the different facts is very helpful.
Great, thank you so much, Simona. So I think, thank you so much for both Simona and Natapana for this excellent presentations and also sharing your experiences. Now I would like to open the floor up for anybody for any additional questions for them on the issues or on the experiences I've just shared.
I have one question regarding the person with disability who has some impairment in their hearing or the vision. So what about the message or rumor? How those segment of the population able to reach your communication message during the disaster? What are the method you have already used for them, though the person who have some visionary and a hearing problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. Maybe if I can ask Mr. Natapanu to answer first and then to Sinoma. Natapanu, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now. That question of disability, right?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So the just for example, the COVID daily briefing, live daily briefing that we had for the past 2 years, that the Thai version had sign language. The Thai version had sign language because, as I mentioned, it was in an interagency entity that we set up called the
Sorry, we lost you again.
And we had the assistance of the social media sign language during each live broadcast for the COVID briefing as well, because it was an interagency effort. It was an interagency effort called the CCSA. Could you hear me? Yeah.
Yep. You're back on now.
Yes. So we had the sign language, as I mentioned, for the those with hearing impairments. But just to underline that the vulnerable group that I mentioned, the vulnerable group, the elderly, the disabled people, I think a disaster. So I think all communication should be geared towards them as well. Not only the disabled, but those who are in the sectors of society may not understand the language that we use, meaning may not understand the kind of technical language that government people like to use. So that's why I think it's very good that television stations, when they translate a lot of information into layman's words, and of course, not too many issues, but go detailed into each issue, as Simona mentioned, right? One thing we found was that there were too many sources of information flying around about COVID. For example, every prominent doctor in Thailand wanted to say something about COVID, but the official word has to come from, as I mentioned, the CCSA interagency briefing with Dr. Tuisin, which had a sign language interpretation. So that's too many sources is one issue, and of course, I think communicating to the vulnerable groups is a very important issue. Aside from the sign language, we also had briefings and information in other languages. The languages of our neighbors. So some information very important, and it's a very good question. We should continue to strongly advocate communicating to the vulnerable groups in disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simona, what about in Thai PBS in terms of looking at the person with disabilities? How do you actually effectively communicate to them?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Natapano says. And also at Thai PBS, we are lucky that we are still using sign language for most of our shows as well. Not so much. It used to be every single show, but now not so much. But apart from disability, the sign language, what we do at the DXC Communication Center is, as Kunatapanu said, most affected by the vulnerable group are most affected by climate change as well. So what we do is we try to go old school. so we are lucky enough to have a team to go on site and to communities and visit them and talk to them. And we also believe that by doing that, we are able to go to the people who may not be able to reach news or watch the news or have internet access, because not only does the disabled, but like Kunatapanu says, the elderly, people who are living in rural communities, they don't have access to maybe television or maybe the internet. So we still do that. We, as the center, we still have teams that go down to different communities and not only give them information, but also ask about their experiences and make them feel included, but also have workshops that they're able to record or make content of their own and then share. So that's maybe not disability, but also the vulnerable group that we try to connect, and we have workshop for the elderly to make videos, or we have workshop for the youth who are in local communities that have no access to telephone, to show them how to take videos with a phone, stuff like that. So that's what we try to do.
Great, thank you so much. I think just kind of adding on to what both of you have said, in terms of, we also face a lot of issue when we go to train local communities on the importance of disaster risk reduction with disaster preparedness. I think everybody has a habit of using the terms that you are most comfortable with, but unfortunately, the terms that you're most comfortable with is probably something that's most difficult for them to understand. So I think try to be relatable, try to put yourself in their situation from their perspective. What would be the best way to reach out to them? I think that will be really meaningful and help you to really craft your message and material when you also think outside the box and also put yourself in their shoes. So that really will help in terms of try to have a bit more effective communication with them. Are there any other questions from our audience today for our two excellent speakers?
I have another question.
Oh, please go ahead.
During the emergency, whenever you have planned to disseminate mass information through mass awareness, how you can involve the public-private partnership modalities, involvement other stakeholder and private sector, because sometimes uniform message or unique message is too much critical, and it is tough to develop on time. And during emergency, you have to give message very quickly, right message, right time, right places. So how you coordinated other private sector and the stakeholder or the local NGOs or NGOs in this process? Can you share your experience? Thank you.
So maybe it's time to Simona first, and then to Khun Natapanu.
Okay, so with what the work that we do here, we have connections with different local people and also local medias throughout the countries. And when we go down to do workshop with them before COVID, because during COVID we aren't able to go through, but we do it through line. We ask them to, when there's a disaster happening, they can be our citizen journalism. So at Thai PBS, we have a program called Citizen Journalists, which are citizens and they're not actual journalists, but when something happens or something crucial happens, they're able to report, and they have a system that can send us videos or even live videos. We also have this 4G kind of device that you can able to broadcast anywhere, wireless. You don't need, like in the old days, you have this big truck, which like when something happens, you need to drive there with this huge truck. But nowadays everything is kind of reduced into a backpack and with a microphone and a camera. So we have that. I think, I'm not sure how many places, but we distributed those throughout Thailand. So if something really urgent happens, we have local people in the area that can go there quickly, and with these devices can live. But one thing is, like I've mentioned earlier, I think with the flooding situation, when it's live and this current, it's hard to confirm facts. So with Thai PBS, sometimes we are a bit slower than other news channels to report the news, because at the DXC, we believe that it has to, we need verification from sources, from the actual sources first, in order before we report the news. Some, like Khun Natapanu says, some want to be the first to report the news, but then in the end they have to retract it, saying, "Oh, sorry, got it wrong." But at Thai PBS, we try to have the actual sources verify the news first. So maybe sometimes we're a bit slower, but that's how we have local people help us report the news as well.
Thank you. Natapanu, what about from your experiences from working with the government side? Hi, can you hear me, Natapanu? Oh, you're back. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah,
Is it my turn now, right?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So about a public-private partnership, I think that the COVID experience in Thailand was a prime example of public-private partnership, because as I mentioned, the whole of government approach, it's actually a whole of society approach as well, because I think during a crisis like COVID, a lot of business leadership was shown. So for example, aside from media, private media joining in and helping to convey the messages needed to convey, the private sector, such as many hospitals, were also played a very significant role in supporting the information and knowledge base in terms of preventing COVID. Aside from that, we had leadership from the business sector. For example, the Thai Chamber of Commerce and the Thai Federation of Industries. So these are actually umbrella associations of all the companies and factories and industries. They also shipped in, and they also actually supported a lot of things that the government could not do alone. One thing was that it successfully asked for the assistance of some factories to produce masks, surgical masks, when it was scarce in Thailand. And that came out very fast because of the collaboration with various industries involved in medical equipment. Another issue was that many companies and factories, of course, they have employees in some factories, of course, in the Eastern Seaboard in Thailand, there are factory workers numbering to the thousands, to 2,000 and things like that. So they also helped in collaborating in terms of helping to prevent COVID in their own area. When we had the quarantine scheme, there was also this kind of a business-led quarantine scheme as well. So when people come into the country, there's this regular quarantine in hotels. That was the first year of COVID, but then we also expanded to not only have it in hotels. We also had it in we called it organizational quarantine, meaning factories and, like, for example, foreign embassies or universities or companies with big areas. They were able to double as quarantine areas for their own people as well. So, for example, if they had staff coming in from abroad or traveling or affected with COVID, they would be able to quarantine in their own area as an organizational quarantine. So this was some of the contributions from the private sector in our experience.
Great, thank you so much. I think just kind of adding from our experience as well, I think everybody knows that, you know, when an emergency situation happens, everything has to happen very quickly. So there's really no time to build out this trust. There's really no time to build out this introduction or understanding between the public sector and private sector. So everything has to be done beforehand. So this is very important for us to be there on the ground, working directly with all the stakeholders. I think everybody heard the word all society approach so many times, but it has to be practiced on the practical level in terms of you need to have constant coordination. You have to have regular consultations between the public sector, between the public sector and the private sector, between the CSOs and NGOs, and very, very importantly, between the media as well, as media is the mouthpiece, is the channel that can really help us to get the message out there. So these kind of prior coordination, this prior consultations and networking is very, very important in terms of trying to have a very effective disaster risk communication approach. So with that, I think we're just about running out of time. So I think once again, on behalf of ADPC, we want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us. And we'd especially like to thank Mr. Natapanu and also Ms. Moma for joining us, providing their really, really sort of rich and extensive experience on this very important topic on fake news. But this is not the end of the discussion. If you have any more questions, you want to do some follow-up queries to both of them, please feel free. I'm speaking on their behalf, if I may, to send us to, and then we can pass on this information or questions back to Simon and Kun Natapanu, and we'll try to get some more clarification if you need it from their end. But I think just understanding the critical issue of fake news, I think it's all start with us. I think a lot of people were asking, what happened if I already share the fake news? What happens if I just forward on something to other people as well? I think going back to what Thailand has done, share before share. So I think really it's up to us to make sure that we do our due diligence, we do the checking of the fake news before we start sending, before we start sharing the information to everyone in our network. And because of YouTube, because of the social media, has trained us so well in terms of really holding on to this very short, very concise message, and also only trying to see as much news that we agree to. So this also takes some time for us to think about being other people's shoes. On the other side of the fence, you know, we also have to be a little bit more compassionate. We have to be a little more open to different thoughts, different kind of opinions, so that we can making sure that we have the ability to really evaluate the information that we receive on the daily basis. So with that, I would like to close this discussion forum. And once again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. And would like to hand the floor back now to Sunil. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. And I request all participants, everybody, to please turn on your camera, and let's give a round of virtual applause to our moderator, to our expert speaker, Simona and Kun Natapanu. Yeah, and thank you so much. Now I want to request my colleague Kun Apibal to take a photograph so that we will share that with you. So please turn on your camera, and I request Kun Apibal to take our photo.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. You can smile. Yes. And may I have one more shot, please? Okay, thank you so much. That's done.
And okay. So thank you so much, everybody. Just last announcement. Monday, we will be having another discussion forum that's on 18th, which will focus on exploring the potential of emerging technologies in connecting the last miles. We will look at the good practices and lesson learned. So please do join us at 4 o'clock, 4 to 5:15, 75 minutes Bangkok time. So with that, I want to thank you, everybody, and then please take care and have a nice evening.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so
Thank
much.
you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Having